welcome to Talking Mental Health, a video podcast from the Wellness Project where I interview mental health professionals on all things mental health and wellness. Today I'm here with Hailey Brown. Hailey, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Hailey Brown. I'm a clinical case manager here at the University of Florida Counseling and Wellness Center. I'm also a registered counseling mental health intern with the state of Florida, and I'll be a licensed provider in the next month or so.
I'm very excited to have Hailey here with us. We're going to talk navigating resources. What do you do when you need help, when you know someone who does, just anything related, and what do you do? What's that first step? And so, Hailey, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and start getting into these questions.
Sure. So the first step is to reach out for some support. So that's the scariest part, right? Is reaching out for that support. If you're at a college or a university, you can reach out to the counseling center on campus. You can reach out to the Dean of Students office, and both of them will be able to help guide you to resources that are beneficial for you.
Yeah. And I think so I don't know if this is like an easy answer question, but I think a lot of times too, even knowing you have that counseling center, I think there's still this like, how do I contact them? How do I find that information? How do I make that step as well? I don't know if you have anything on that.
Sure. So I use Google all day, every day, right? So like I'm Googling the name of my school and counseling center, and usually a lot of things will pop up as far as resources, how to get in touch with the counselor. Here at UF, we have counseling.ufl.edu, and that'll connect you with the counseling center and all of the resources that we have. But I would just start with a search or talking to your classmates, talking to your friends that are on campus and seeing how they've gotten connected also.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you adding that a little bit too, because I think like even in undergrad, I knew we had a counseling center, but I heard people talk about it, had no idea where it was, no idea how to connect with them. And so that was kind of my first thought when you said that was, how do we do that?
Yeah. So going on the website, I think a lot of schools, especially in Florida, locally are trying to be more present online. And so really posting like all of our events that we're having, our workshops, our groups, our services that we're offering. So going online to the website may be the first stop. A lot of schools also have social media presence. And so maybe just looking on there to see what fits for you.
Yeah. Thank you. And then I'm curious, after we take that first step, after we contact the counseling center, depending on why you're there, whether it's for yourself, for someone else, the varying levels of what could be happening in your life at that moment.
Yeah.
What happens? What happens after you call them? What's the next step? Is it different options for different, types of mental health? And, what's available?
Yeah. And that's going to vary. Like you said, it's based on your lived experience and what you need when you're presenting, when you're coming to counseling. And so it could vary. You could be referred to groups, which is our primary source here at the University of Florida. We do a lot of group work because it's super beneficial to connect with your peers. But you could also be referred off campus to a community provider. You could be referred to an individual provider. You could also be giving like psychiatry options for like medication. Really any of those or a plan of all of those. You can do all of those things at the same time. And so really talking with that counselor that does your intake and coming up with a plan that you feel good about and that you are motivated to actually attend. That's the hard part, right? Is like, okay, I want to go to therapy, but now I got to do the work and go to therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just kind of what I visualized from what you said is like taking that first step and contacting them, walking in, phone call, email, whatever it is, basically kind of opens up like a network of different options available to you. Like you're walking in and then it's kind of like this connections within the community, I guess is kind of where I'm going with it.
Yeah. So you're going to come up with a plan that like, what are your goals for therapy and how can I make small steps to reach those goals. And talking with your provider, when you do that initial intake, they're going to come up with options for you and resources. They're going to be most knowledgeable about what resources are close by, what's affordable, and who you might be a good fit for. So finding a therapist that's a good fit is really important. But really coming up with a plan that fits with your class schedule and financially that you can afford, those are all considerations as well.
I want to go off script just a little bit.
Okay.
This is not in my list of questions I sent you. I hope that's okay. I realize that we're talking about navigating resources, but we haven't defined that word resource because I think in any area that word means something different.
Sure.
So in mental health, what are we talking about when we're talking about resources?
Yeah. So in mental health, I mean, it really starts from those foundational things like, are you safe? Do you have food? Do you have a safe place to live? Those are like the building blocks for psychological well being. And so you can't feel mentally healthy if you don't have those things. So, really, as a case manager, as a counselor, I want to make sure that you're eating, that you're sleeping, that your thoughts of self-harm and suicide aren't at a risk of harming yourself and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can talk about resources. And so the word resources is really, how do we fill in those gaps for you? Is that connecting you with a food bank? Is that connecting you with a housing option? Is that connecting you with a counselor or group, or psychiatry? And so really, what resources, I know I'm using that word in the definition, but what
Okay.
what options do we have in the community or on campus that could help you be successful both personally and academically?
Thank you. I just realized we were talking about it and I was like, I want to kind of narrow that down a little bit just
Yeah.
because of all the different places our minds can go when we think of what a resource is. So
Mhm.
I appreciate that. I
Yeah,
appreciate you answering it.
sure.
um, so this next question is a little weird. I've often heard people use the phrase therapist shopping.
Mhm.
And I think they use it in the sense of like, I think that there's a misconception sometimes that you go to a therapist and that's your therapist.
Mm.
And that it's not okay to move on. It's not okay to find someone else if you don't click. And so I'm just curious if you ever heard that term. And then I'd also just like to talk about it a little bit, like
Sure.
that ability to go somewhere else if where you are is not helping you.
Yeah, yeah. So finding a therapist that you feel like is a good fit, and good fit meaning I feel safe in that space. I can be honest. I can go and sit and tell them what's going on in my life without fear of judgment. They're listening to me. They're applying like coping skills to my life that are specific for me and helpful. Those are all good qualities, like green flags that you're looking for when you find a therapist. Therapist shopping is more so like, maybe I'm jumping around from therapist to therapist, and that could be for a very like variety of reasons. But I want to make sure that people understand, like, you don't have to just stick with a therapist that you first go to, right? A
Mhm.
lot of therapists will do a 15-minute like free consult to make sure that you're a good fit for them. But even if you go to that first hour and a half initial intake and you're like, yeah, they're okay, I would give them at least 3 sessions before you decide, like, yeah, okay, I'll see this person for long term. Make sure they're a good fit. Make sure you guys have a good conversation. Make sure they're giving you skills and listening to you.
Yeah, and I think that too, I like that you include that little bit of like most therapists will do like a free consult of like
Hmm.
let's talk for a little while and see how this goes because I think that seems a little less scary to me than going into an initial long appointment for the first time and not knowing this person at all, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's important for you to find a good therapist, but it's also important for the therapist to make sure that you're a good fit for them and what their practice is. So
Mhm.
it's a collaborative relationship. Therapy is, so you're building goals together, you're working toward them together, and so that fit is so important.
Mhm. So then I know something that would stop me personally is not knowing how to stop seeing one therapist and moving on to another. I think that step of like, what do I do? Do I tell this therapist something? Do I ghost them? Like, what am I think that step right there would cause me to not move on. And so I'm
Sure.
curious, what should a student do in that situation?
I mean, it varies, right? It depends on the situation. Ghosting, the therapist will likely wonder what happened. Like, well, where did you go? Did I do something? Did they just stop coming to therapy? But that's not uncommon either. Sometimes people come to therapy for one session and then they never come back.
Mhm.
And that's for a variety of reasons. So having that conversation about what your goals are in therapy with the therapist can be helpful in helping you to steer that relationship. But then also being upfront, being honest with that therapist, right? Like, I don't feel like you're listening to me, and I'd like to look for other therapists. I haven't noticed any improvement. How can we change our sessions to where I start to feel better? And the therapist, at least in my experience, therapists would appreciate that feedback. So then they can really kind of work with you on what you want. They may feel like, yeah, things are going okay. Like I'm listening to this client, but you may not feel the same way. So having that open conversation with them, you can also say like, I'd like to explore other options. I'll call you back to schedule. That's
Mhm.
okay too.
I'm curious now, it kind of sparked another question for me. Is there a sense in where, you've been seeing one therapist for a while, but you don't feel like you're improving, or you feel like
Mhm.
you might need something different that that therapist cannot offer?
Mhm.
Is there any sort of relationship with that therapist, with the one you're seeing currently, where they can help you navigate to someone who could? Is that also kind of an option?
Yeah, for sure. So part of a therapist role is to help connect you with resources that are supportive and that are helpful. So, like if you want a more specialized form of therapy, then talk to your therapist about finding somebody who does provide that. If you feel stuck in that therapeutic relationship or you feel like you haven't made progress, maybe you've been seeing them for 2 years or more than that. Um, well, we're kind of spinning in the mud, right? Like we're just kind of stuck. Well, let's find someone together that I can move to the next level, like that I can process this. Maybe your current therapist doesn't specialize in something that has happened to you in your life. So you want to move to someone who has a different perspective, who has a different approach to therapy, and that's okay too.
Mhm. Yeah. So a big part of a lot of what we talk about words, a big part of what we talk about is peer support.
Mhm.
Because, depending on your home relationship, you may
Mhm.
have your parents, you may not, but regardless, they're probably a good distance away. They're not immediate access
Sure.
the way they used to be. And so we have our peers, we have our friends, we have the people we see in our classes every single week, several times a week, depending on the class. So we
Mhm.
spend a lot of time talking about peer support here. How can we equip peers? What do they do? How do we make sure they're okay in the process? And so I'd like to spend a little time on peer support.
Okay.
Um, and this is kind of a broad one, but just like the first one, what's the first step for someone who wants to offer peer support to a friend who is in a bad situation?
Sure. Well, this is a tough question. I have so many thoughts on peer support. Peers are our number one source of support, whether we go to therapy or whether we don't, or how we approach situations. Um, a lot of the time, I hear students say, like, oh, I can't tell my friends because I don't want to be a burden to them.
Mm,
So, making your friend feel like they can open up, like, I'm here for you, you're here for me. It's a collaborative relationship. We can have these honest conversations, and I can support you in whatever way that looks like. But
mhm,
also being mindful that you're not responsible for that friend's well being. You can connect them with resources. Hey, I can share the link to the counseling website. Hey, I can help schedule that appointment with you. But you're not responsible for healing them or carrying their burdens in any way like that.
I appreciate you kind of adding all sides of that, of like, making yourself available.
Mhm.
Because, I mean, from everything you hear, it is that like sense of like, I don't want to share because I don't want them to feel like they have to carry this with them as well. I
Mhm.
don't want them to have to worry about me all the time, all those things. But then also add that aspect of like, you know, being there to help.
Mhm.
Um, which always gets me thinking too about that aspect of like, how do we also care for our peers?
Mhm.
People who are offering the support, depending on the varying level of mental health, could affect them in a way too. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious, is that peer, are there resources for peers, for them to be able to get help on things as well?
Sure. Yeah, what you're saying is so true, right? And that's even true for therapists, right? We have this term in therapy called vicarious trauma where it's like you hear someone else's story and that impacts you so greatly. So how are you taking care of yourself, right? Can I after that hard conversation with a friend, can I talk to one of my friends, not sharing what that friend shared, but just how I'm impacted? Can I go for a walk? Can I reach out to my counselor to have a session to kind of process how I'm providing that support? But really just kind of having those boundaries where you don't feel responsible for their emotion, you don't feel responsible for their burdens, but you can provide that open space and be honest and, provide that care.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all this information. I think again, I just think this one was so important because we've had past episodes where like, responses, go to the counseling center. How do you contact a counseling center, and like basic things, but I think that we really needed to have a bigger discussion of like, what does it look like
Mm-hmm.
to reach out to those resources you have available to you?
Yeah. A lot of the time the resources are listed in your syllabus too, right? Like we always like scroll past all of the information in the syllabus sometimes and just go straight to the schedule. But at least here at UF, we have a lot of the resources listed in the syllabus. But then also just Google, your school name, counseling center, or like therapist local to Gainesville, Florida, or whatever it might be. And you should be able to find some resources there.
Honestly, and I love that advice too, because I don't know why I've never thought about that when I Google everything else in my life. I don't know why I've never thought of just Google counseling center college, like,
Yeah.
insert your college name. I don't know why I've never gotten there. I love that.
Well, now you're a clinical case manager.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for all of this information. I'm very excited for this episode. And I appreciate you kind of taking the time to answer all the questions I gave you and the ones I didn't.
Sure. Yeah, no, this was great. Please reach out for additional resources. I'm happy to help. Here at UF, start with the Counseling and Wellness Center, and we can get you connected with local resources, state resources, however we can help.
Very cool. And thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in our next episode. Bye.